Today is going to be a fun conversation because I'm going to be talking with Clay Scroggins, and you may not know Clay, have heard Clay, be familiar with Clay, but Clay's a pretty fun guy. And Clay, before you explain what you do,
Yep.
You have a boss. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Her name is Jenny.
Who's Jenny?
That's my wife.
Oh, okay.
She is the mother of our 5 children, and she, so I released this book called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge, and I had a few people that responded in a very humorous way. That
Yes.
They sent my wife messages being like, "Oh, we get it. This must be a book about you." I work for Andy Stanley.
Yes.
He is the man, and he is one of my bosses. I still have many bosses, but he is the senior leader of our organization. He doesn't like the word senior, though. I think it makes him feel like he's older than he really is.
Well, I asked that question up front because that's really the foundation for today's conversation. Yeah. Look, I have Clay's book here.
There it is.
How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And so I just wanted everybody to know you have some experience about leading when you're not in charge. In fact, you are now, though, the lead pastor at North Point Community Church, and more than 12,000 people gather for services every weekend. But can you just share about how you kind of evolved into that responsibility, Clay?
Sure. I grew up in a Christian home, moved to Atlanta in 1998 to go to Georgia Tech. I was studying engineering, but I started going to church at North Point, actually, as an 18-year-old college student, and started volunteering with high school students. I interned the summer after my freshman year with our facilities team. I wanted to work in high school ministry, but they had one intern position and they had already filled it. So I was sweeping out I'll never forget, this was summer of 1999. I would be sweeping out the auditorium, and Andy would come in and would play. This is like at lunch break. It felt like a David and Saul moment, except Andy was David and Saul in this story. He would come in and he would play the piano at lunchtime.
How about that?
And I'm sure it would just soothe him, because he was carrying a lot at the time, just with a new church that was budding and having to preach and lead and all that stuff. And I would be just sweeping out the auditorium. So that was kind of my first experience working with Andy. He did not know my name till at least 18 years later, I would say. Only a couple of weeks ago. So, so I went from college student volunteering in student ministry to I started working at North Point in 2006 as the high school director at one of our campuses called Brownsbridge. Moved to North Point as the high school director here, and then moved back to Brownsbridge as the campus pastor, and then moved back here as the campus pastor or lead pastor. We use those titles interchangeably. A lot of times when we say campus pastor to people that are just kind of new to our church, they think we're talking about a school, because they go, "Oh, you're in charge of the campus. What do you guys do? Education?" So anyway, we use that title, lead pastor, campus pastor. But yeah, that's what I do now. I get the opportunity to lead in the shadow of Andy Stanley, which is a place that I have grown quite comfortable leading from.
Yeah. So Clay, I don't know if you knew this, but I also play the piano. So at any time, if you want to come over during your lunch break and just listen to me play, I'll do that for you as well.
Sweep out your house?
Yes. All right. So through the years, you've taken these steps in leadership, and I'm just curious, what did you learn as you were kind of moving through these different leadership roles at North Point?
Well, the biggest thing I have learned, and that's really where this book came from, was that I think I just always thought, and I didn't realize this until the last couple of years, but I knew I always wanted to be a leader, but I just thought leadership was authority. And I think a lot of leaders make that same misguided assumption about leadership, that it is about how much authority you have. It's about the position that you hold on the org chart. It's about the office that you have or don't have, or the parking spot or the title. And the more and more I'm learning about leadership, the more I'm realizing that that is a very dangerous thing to believe that I'm either waiting to get to be in charge until I start leading, or I can't start leading until someone gives me more authority. So I love the tagline. I didn't write the tagline for the book. I think the publisher came up with that after the process was finished. But I love the idea of leveraging influence when you lack authority. And that really is what the book is all about. And that's been my journey. I am not a leadership guru. I'm definitely not a leadership expert. I didn't set out to write a leadership book. I really just wanted to tell my story and wanted to be able to help people with my story. And what I have learned working under a fantastic leader like Andy Stanley is that I can't wait until I'm given more authority, because if I do, I will just be sitting around and waiting for a long time. But instead, I need to take the authority that I have and figure out how I can cultivate influence with the position that I'm in right now. And I found that this is a very hopeful message for people, no matter what position they're in, intern, middle-level manager, department director, team leader, even senior pastor, because even the best leaders realize that using your authority to try to get people to do something doesn't work for long. That the greatest way to lead, whether you have the position or not, is to cultivate influence and then to learn how to leverage it.
Yeah, Clay, I do love that concept of leveraging influence, even if you don't have the authority. Can you share an example from your time at North Point where you've lived that out personally?
Well, I mean, it is literally an everyday thing. But probably the most current thing that I'm dealing with right now is, so I'm a lead pastor of our campus. We've got, as you said, on a good Sunday, we'll have 12,000 people in our building. We have about 110 staff. And the culture that we live in is changing. And I've talked to you about this quite a bit, even when we're not in red recording something. We're having to change the way we think about church, because our vision statement for the longest time has been, we want to be a church that an unchurched person loves to attend. However, what it means to attend a church in 2018 is very different than what it meant to attend a church in 1998. I mean, when I started attending North Point, the only time you could attend North Point was on a Sunday at either 9 or 11, or at the time, I think we had a 1 o'clock service. And the only way you could even catch the message was if you subscribed to the cassette tape getting mailed to your house. But now, because of the way technology has changed, the way people are attending church it's radically changing. And it is very common for our volunteers to go, hey, look, the iteration of my spiritual growth is to get invited by someone, is to click on something and watch something, because we're a screen first culture, and then to perhaps attend, and then to get into a group and sit around and talk about spiritual growth for a long time, and then to take a step to serve. And then what we're finding is, once people take that step to serve, that desire to attend, it just looks different. And the way they want to consume biblical teaching, the way they want to consume worship, it looks different depending on their personality and their temperament and how they're wired and their giftedness. And so it's really challenging our metrics. It's challenging the way we count, because people in your organization are all going to revolve around what you say is most important. They're going to look at the scoreboard and they want to know, tell me exactly where I am. I heard a leader recently say that it is a cruel and unusual punishment to pay someone to do a job and not tell them how they're doing. Most people don't know how they're doing because the scoreboard's not clear. But the danger of the scoreboard that we've had for the longest time in church is it's all about nickels and noses. It's all about how many people are in the seats and how much money has been given. And this new reality, the new world that we're living in, the way attendance is changing, it's really challenging our paradigm of what church is. And it's also challenging how we're counting. So not everybody in our organization is in agreement on that. But I've got to learn, how can I use the influence that I have? How can I cultivate more influence to be a leader in this conversation for our organization? Because the way I see the world, I believe, is the right way to see the world, because it's the way I see the world. And I think the way we ought to count is the way I think we ought to count. And I think it's what we ought to measure, but not everybody sees it that way. So I'm having to, on a daily basis, figure out, what am I doing that's cultivating more influence? What am I doing that's costing me influence? And how can I leverage the influence that I have to be able to help us land at a place that I think is the best place possible for now and for the future? So that's fresh paint right there.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So here's the deal. I mean, you wrote this whole book about leading when you're not in charge. And technically, I guess you're not in charge at North Point Community Church, but you do work for Andy Stanley, who I'm assuming this is being recorded, you would suggest is probably the world's greatest boss. There are people watching this conversation, Clay, though, and they're thinking, I'm not in charge and I don't work for Andy Stanley, the world's greatest boss. So what do you recommend for folks like that?
This morning, Tony, I was sitting, I lead we call it, well, I was on your podcast. I guess it was about 6-9 months ago, talking about leadership development groups.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting at Chick-fil-A at 7 a.m. this morning with a guy that's in our leadership development group that I lead. And he's just a guy that's just not, I wouldn't say he's experiencing being fully alive. And so I asked him, I said, hey, where would you, if 10 is the most life possible, where are you right now? He said, I'm like a 5. I'm like, what's possible? Like in 2 years, like what could you be at? He said, maybe an 8. And I said, what's in the way between the 5 and the 8? He said, work. He said, my job is. He said, it stinks. Honestly, I don't feel good at it. I feel like people that I work with, they don't really like me. They don't trust me. They feel like they take me for granted. I don't feel appreciated, all this stuff. And basically it was one of my most favorite pastoral conversations, because I could apply what I have written about to this conversation with a guy in our church, because I'm saying, hey, look, I know you think it's your job. You think it's circumstantial, that if the people at my job changed, everything would get better. But the truth is, you can't control that. You can't control what the other people can do. But what you can control today is how you respond at work. And that's true for every single one of us. And I don't care how bad your boss is, you have the opportunity today to figure out what would cultivate more influence and what is costing you influence today. And so we began to have a conversation about what he's doing that's gaining him, that's bringing him influence, and what he's doing that's costing him influence at work. And if he could change that's an inside out way of living, instead of going, hey, if my circumstances would change, I'd be happier. No, what if you could figure out, how could I be different? And some of it is about being different, and some of it's about doing different, 2 very different things. But I really believe that every one of us has something that we could change, that we could get better at, that we could do differently, that would allow us to cultivate more influence. And as we do that, I think it will give us the very thing that we're looking for, which is for our voice to be heard, for our life to matter, for us to be able to move an idea forward, or instead of having to go work around the organization, how do we use the organization to harness the power of the organization to be able to get done what we think we can and want to get done? So yeah, I get that question all the time, Tony, of, well, it's probably easy for you, bro. You work for Andy Stanley, but God has worked through great leaders throughout history, and he's worked through bad leaders. But the constant in it all is the personal responsibility that every one of us has to figure out, what can I influence? What can I change? What can I do differently to be able to cultivate more influence?
That's very good. Clay, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Again, the book here, it's How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And Clay, I think I saw something about some additional supporting resources coming out with the book soon?
Yes, thanks for bringing that up, Tony. Let's see, as the time we're recording this, at the end of April, there is a discussion guide coming out, and a DVD that's got some teaching sessions on it. So really just a way to help people who want to use it with teams, both at work and even in your church with lay volunteer leaders. So hopefully that will be a great resource for people.
Very good. All right. Thanks again, Clay. It was great to have you on today.
Thanks, Tony.